Welcome back to the Deep Dives. Today we're going deeper into modern Indian history, especially for you UPSC aspirants out there. It's a crucial subject for the GS1 paper, but it's also a fascinating exploration for anyone who uh, is intrigued by this period.
Absolutely.
Last time we explored the rise of Indian nationalism, all those powerful
Uh-huh.
ideas, and the movements that eventually led to independence.
Yeah.
But this time, we're going to be turning our attention to a law that was designed to suppress those very sentiments. We're talking about the Vernacular Press Act of 1878.
It's a fascinating chapter in Indian history, but a bit of a dark one.
Yeah, for sure. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like. The more support we have, the more deep dives we can bring you. So now picture this. It's the 19th century, British rule is at its peak, and newspapers are flourishing in all these vibrant regional languages.
Yeah. It was an era of burgeoning print culture,
Yeah.
and these newspapers weren't just reporting the news, they were shaping public discourse, giving voice to nationalist sentiments and a critique of British policies.
And that's where the British started to get nervous. They saw this rising vernacular press as a challenge to their authority.
Right. You're absolutely right. The British administration was increasingly concerned about the growing influence of these newspapers, especially their role in fostering, nationalist consciousness and dissent. And remember, for the British, maintaining control over information, public opinion was crucial to their rule.
So they felt they had to clamp down, control the narrative.
Exactly. And that's when we get the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. It's often called the Gagging Act.
Yeah.
Pretty ominous title.
Yeah. That doesn't sound very friendly to free speech, does it?
Not at all.
So let's break down this act. It was enacted in 1878 under Lord Lytton, the Viceroy of India. What were some of its key provisions?
Well, imagine you're a journalist and you're full of passion, ready to share your perspective. Suddenly you're hit with this wave of restrictions. First, you need a license to operate. The government has the power to, grant or deny these licenses, effectively controlling who gets to publish.
That's a pretty hefty barrier to entry, especially for a smaller independent publication.
Exactly. And then there's the financial burden. The act imposed these hefty security deposits, large sums of money that publishers had to hand over. And if they published anything, deemed seditious or against British interests, they risked losing that deposit.
So it's not just about silencing dissent. It's also about making it financially difficult to even speak out.
That's right. And it doesn't stop there. The British government also had the right to confiscate printing presses and materials. Imagine that, writing something that's just slightly critical could cost you your entire livelihood.
It's like a sword hanging over their heads, constantly reminding them of the potential consequences.
Yeah. And to add another layer of control, they introduced this pre-publication censorship. Government officials could review the content before it was even printed.
So they were trying to control not just what people were saying, but what they were even thinking.
Right. It was, it was all about controlling the narrative.
So what was the real strategy behind these provisions? It seems like it goes far beyond just silencing a few critical voices.
Well, it really reveals the British anxieties about the changing landscape of India at the time. This rise of the vernacular press was coinciding with the surge in nationalist sentiments, social reform movements. The British saw this as a direct threat to their control.
So by controlling the press, they were trying to control the narrative of India itself.
Exactly. They wanted to, they aimed to curb the spread of nationalist ideas, prevent the mobilization of public opinion against them, ultimately just maintain their grip on power.
It's a reminder that information is power, and whoever controls that information has a significant advantage.
Absolutely. And in this case, the British were determined to maintain that advantage, even if it meant resorting to these measures that really stifled freedom of expression and went against their own professed values of liberty and justice.
But with all these measures, did they actually succeed in silencing the Indian press?
Well, they definitely created a chilling effect, forcing many publications to self-censor or to go out of business altogether. But as we'll see, the Indian spirit of resistance is not so easily quelled.
So how did the Indian people respond to this blatant attempt to muzzle their voices? Did they simply resign themselves to being silenced?
Certainly not. The Vernacular Press Act may have been intended to stifle dissent, but it really inadvertently fueled a fire of resistance. It sparked a wave of creative responses.
So the British may have underestimated the power of the very ideas they were trying to suppress.
That's what's so intriguing about this period. They, in their efforts to control the narrative, they actually ended up strengthening the very forces they feared.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the act had a chilling effect. It led to self-censorship. Can you tell us a bit more about how this played out?
Well, imagine you're an editor at the time. Every word you write, every story you publish is now subject to scrutiny. The fear of losing your license, your printing press, or even facing imprisonment.
So even if they weren't directly shut down by the British, they felt pressured to tone down their criticism.
Exactly. And this self-censorship wasn't limited to political content. It extended to social issues, cultural matters. Anything that could be perceived as challenging British authority was carefully considered.
It's a reminder of how the threat of censorship can have a profound impact on how ideas are shared. But as you said, the Indian people weren't going to be silenced so easily.
Right. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, many refused to bow down. They found ways to resist.
So let's talk about that resistance. How
Yeah.
did they manage to fight back against this powerful force?
It was a combination of strategies. Some challenged the act in courts. They argued it violated fundamental rights. Others took a more a clandestine route, underground publishing.
Kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. And the resistance wasn't just confined to, the elites or intellectuals. Students, social reformers, ordinary people, all played their part. And this widespread resistance really exposed the limitations of this British attempt to control information.
So it seems like the act of suppressing these voices only amplified them.
You're absolutely right. The act inadvertently gave it more power.
It's a classic example of how attempts to suppress ideas can actually make them more potent.
Precisely. And what's remarkable is the sheer the ingenuity and resilience displayed by those who resisted. They developed creative ways to circumvent censorship.
It wasn't just about defiance. It was about, outsmarting the censors, finding these loopholes.
That's right. And it wasn't limited to writing and publishing. They organized public readings, they staged plays, they used songs and folk art to spread their message. It was really a testament to the power of human ingenuity.
It really paints a vivid picture of a society that was unwilling to be silenced.
Mm-hmm.
But this resistance, it wasn't without risk, right?
Absolutely not. The stakes were incredibly high. Those who dared to speak out, they faced imprisonment, financial ruin. But their courage serves as a reminder, that the fight for freedom, for justice, it often comes at a cost.
It's sobering, but also inspiring.
Yes, very much so.
Their stories are a testament to the human spirit, that unwavering pursuit of truth and liberty.
Yes, and their legacy continues to inspire us today. It reminds us that the fight for freedom of expression is ongoing. It requires constant vigilance and courage.
That's a very powerful message. But before we delve into those connections, let's shift our focus to specific examples of resistance.
Yes, let's bring this history to life with some stories.
Let's do it. So what intriguing details can you share that highlight the impact and the resistance that this act generated?
Well, for starters, let's rewind a bit, even before the act, to a truly groundbreaking moment in Indian journalism.
Okay.
The emergence of Samachar Darpan, India's very first vernacular newspaper.
The very first. Tell me more about this pioneering publication.
Picture this. It's the early 19th century, and this Bengali weekly newspaper just bursts onto the scene. That was Samachar Darpan. It was started, believe it or not, by the Baptist Missionary Society.
Wow, that's surprising. I wouldn't have guessed that the first vernacular newspaper in India was started by missionaries.
It is quite interesting, isn't it? It shows the complex interplay of factors at play. But regardless of its origins, Samachar Darpan marked a turning point. It demonstrated the power of publishing in the language of the people.
So it opened the floodgates.
Exactly. It paved the way for countless other newspapers and journals to emerge in various regional languages across India. It was a sign of things to come.
What a legacy. But now, fast forwarding to the time of the Vernacular Press Act, were there any specific newspapers that were directly targeted by this act?
Oh, absolutely. The British had their eyes on several publications that they deemed troublesome. One notable example is the Amrit Bazar Patrika. This newspaper was known for its sharp critiques of British policies, its advocacy for, Indian self-rule.
So they were really pushing the boundaries.
They were indeed, and the British saw them as a major threat. Amrit Bazar Patrika was particularly clever in its approach. Initially, it was published in English, which exempted it from the Vernacular Press Act's provisions. But when the British tried to clamp down on English publications as well, the editors of Amrit Bazar Patrika did something brilliant.
What did they do?
They switched overnight to publishing entirely in Bengali.
Wow.
It was a stroke of genius. It allowed them to continue their critical reporting while technically remaining outside the scope of the act.
They outsmarted the British?
They did. This act of defiance became a symbol of resistance against these oppressive press laws. Amrit Bazar Patrika continued to be a thorn in the side of the British administration and played a key role in, galvanizing public opinion.
This story really brings to life the challenges and triumphs of the Indian press during this era. It's a reminder that even in the face of censorship and oppression, the desire for freedom of expression, it finds a way.
It certainly does, and it highlights the important role that individual publications like this, like Samachar Darpan and Amrit Bazar Patrika, played in shaping the course of history.
It's incredible how these stories of resilience and defiance can be so inspiring, even after all these years. We've covered a lot of ground already in this first part. I think it's time for us to take a pause and reflect on what we've learned so far.
Agreed. These are not just historical anecdotes. They're powerful reminders of the enduring importance of a free press, the courage it takes to stand up for truth in the face of power.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. We've been exploring how this law that was designed to silence, dissenting voices in colonial India, how it actually sparked this wave of resistance and fueled those national sentiments.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how attempts to control information can backfire, especially when they're perceived as unjust, oppressive. The British may have hoped to suppress the vernacular press, but they inadvertently gave it more power, more influence.
Right. They underestimated the resilience, the creativity of the Indian people and their determination to make their voices heard. But this story doesn't end there, does it? I mean, this act wasn't in place forever.
You're absolutely right. Despite its initial impact, the Vernacular Press Act eventually, it met its demise. And the story of its repeal is just as fascinating as its enactment. It really reveals the shifting political landscape, the growing pressure on the British administration. Okay, so tell us, how did this gagging act, how did it finally get repealed? Was it a sudden decision, or was it more of a result of sustained pressure, changing circumstances?
It was certainly not a sudden decision. Remember all that resistance we talked about, the underground press, the public outcry, the criticisms from intellectuals, nationalist leaders. All of that contributed to a growing momentum for change.
So it was a combination of internal pressure from within India and maybe some external factors as well.
You're on the right track. Within India, there was sustained opposition from, prominent figures, organizations. Think about it. You're a scholar, you're a leader, you believe in the power of ideas, and you see this act as this direct assault on those very principles. You're not going to stay silent.
It makes sense that they would use their platforms to challenge this act and and advocate for its repeal.
Exactly. They highlighted the act's injustice, arguing that it stifled free speech, undermined these principles of a free society. They organized petitions, public meetings, kept the pressure on the administration.
I imagine the British weren't too happy with all this dissent, especially coming from influential figures.
No, they weren't, but they couldn't ignore it completely. The Indian National Congress, which was gaining momentum at the time, they made the repeal of this act one of its key demands. And the Congress, with its growing influence, was able to mobilize public opinion.
So the British were facing pressure both within India, but also from their own political circles back home.
Precisely. Remember, there were liberal voices in Britain itself who condemned the act as draconian, incompatible with British values of liberty, free speech. And those voices, while maybe not as loud, they added to that growing chorus, calling for the act's repeal.
It seems like the British were caught in a bit of a bind. So how did they respond to this mounting pressure?
Well, it's important to remember that the British administration wasn't monolithic. There were different opinions and approaches within the government itself. Some officials were staunch supporters of the act, believing that it was necessary to maintain order. Others, though, began to recognize that the act was doing more harm than good.
So there are these internal debates, disagreements about the efficacy and the morality of this act.
That's right. And this internal dissent, coupled with that external pressure, eventually led to a shift in policy. The tide began to turn with the arrival of a new viceroy, Lord Ripon. He succeeded Lord Lytton in 1880.
Interesting how a change in leadership can sometimes lead to such a significant policy shift.
It certainly can. And Lord Ripon, unlike his predecessor, he was more sympathetic to Indian aspirations, and he recognized the need for a freer press. He believed that engaging with Indian voices, allowing for greater freedom of expression would ultimately be more beneficial for British rule than trying to suppress it.
So a combination of factors, the sustained resistance from within India, pressure from liberal voices in Britain, and a change in leadership with a more conciliatory approach.
Exactly. And all of this culminated in the Act's repeal in 1882. Lord Ripon, in one of his first major decisions, overturned this controversial law, signaling a shift towards a more liberal, less repressive approach to governing India.
It must have been a major victory for the opponents of a free press and a testament to the power of sustained resistance.
It was indeed. The repeal of the Vernacular Press Act was a significant milestone in the history of the Indian press, and in the broader struggle for greater autonomy, self-rule. It demonstrated that even a powerful colonial regime could be swayed by public opinion.
So the repeal of the act, it was a victory for free speech, a step towards greater autonomy. But was it a complete victory? Did it erase the scars left by this oppressive law?
It's important to acknowledge that, the repeal, while it was a significant win, it didn't magically erase the challenges. The British, despite this concession, they continued to exert control through other means.
So it was a step in the right direction, but the fight for a truly free, independent press in India was far from over.
That's a crucial point. The repeal was a battle won, but the war for freedom of expression continued, and the legacy of the act, despite its repeal, continued to shake the landscape of Indian journalism, Indian politics.
In what ways did the legacy of the act linger even after it was gone? How did it impact the trajectory of the Indian freedom struggle?
Well, for one, it solidified the importance of a free press in the minds of the Indian people. The fight against this act had highlighted the role of newspapers in shaping public opinion, holding power accountable, advocating for change. And this awareness fueled the growth of a more assertive, independent Indian press, which played this crucial role in the decades leading up to independence.
So it's like this act, in trying to suppress the press, it actually ended up strengthening it.
Exactly. It had this unintended consequence of galvanizing the press and making it a more powerful force for social and political change. And the experience of resisting this oppressive law, it gave journalist publishers this newfound sense of purpose.
Like they emerged from this struggle even more determined to speak truth to power and use their platforms to amplify those voices.
That's a great way to put it. And this newfound assertiveness of the press, it had this ripple effect on the broader nationalist movement. Newspapers became these crucial platforms for disseminating nationalist ideas, mobilizing support, challenging the legitimacy of British rule.
They became a force to be reckoned with.
They were indeed. And the legacy of the Vernacular Press Act wasn't one of silence. It was one of amplified voices, of resilience and a deeper understanding of the power of a free and independent press.
It's a legacy that continues to inspire today. It reminds us of the importance of safeguarding freedom of expression, holding power accountable. But we've seen that the story of the Vernacular Press Act didn't end with its repeal. It left this lasting impact on the Indian freedom struggle, shaping the strategies and tactics of those who fought for independence.
That's right. The experience of resisting this law had a profound impact on the leaders, the intellectuals of the nationalist movement. It shaped their understanding of the British Raj and the strategies they employed.
So how did the legacy of this act specifically influence the trajectory of the Indian freedom struggle? What lessons did nationalist leaders draw from this experience?
Well, one of the key takeaways was the realization that the British weren't going to grant them freedom willingly. It had to be fought for, and a free press was going to be, a crucial weapon in that fight. The act, in trying to suppress the press, had actually exposed its importance as a tool for mobilization, for education, for challenging that colonial authority.
Like the British inadvertently gave the nationalist movement a blueprint for using the power of information to their advantage.
Exactly. The nationalist leaders, having witnessed the power of the vernacular press and the impact of its suppression, they understood that controlling the narrative was essential. They realized that a free and vibrant press could be used to spread awareness, about the injustices of colonial rule, to mobilize public opinion, in favor of self-rule, to counter the propaganda that was being disseminated by the British, and to really inspire a sense of national unity and purpose.
So it sounds like they learned this valuable lesson about the strategic importance of communication.
Precisely. And this realization had a profound impact on the subsequent strategies that were employed by the nationalist movement. They began to focus on building their own media networks, establishing newspapers and journals and in various languages across the country, training and supporting journalists who could effectively articulate the nationalist cause, and really engaging with the international community,
Mhm.
to garner support for their struggle.
So the legacy of the Vernacular Press Act went far beyond just the fight for a free press. It shaped the strategies and tactics of the Indian freedom struggle, led to a more organized, informed, and ultimately successful movement.
That's a very astute observation. The act, in trying to silence dissent, it inadvertently fueled the very fire that it aimed to extinguish. It exposed the vulnerabilities of colonial rule and provided the nationalist movement with these valuable lessons about the power of information.
It's a fascinating example of how even oppressive measures can have these unintended consequences.
It's a reminder that attempts to control information and suppress dissent, they often backfire. The story of the Vernacular Press Act is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the power of ideas, and the ultimate triumph of freedom over oppression.
It's a story that continues to inspire us, reminding us of the importance of safeguarding freedom of expression, holding power accountable. But as we've seen, the story of the Vernacular Press Act, it didn't end with its repeal. It left this lasting impact on the Indian freedom struggle, shaping the strategies and tactics of those who fought for independence.
That's right. The experience of resisting this oppressive law had a profound impact on the leaders, the intellectuals of the Indian nationalist movement, shaping their understanding of the British Raj and the strategies they employed in their quest for self-rule.
So how did the legacy of the act specifically influence the trajectory of the Indian freedom struggle? What lessons did nationalist leaders draw from this experience?
Well, one of the key takeaways was the realization that the British weren't going to grant them freedom willingly. It had to be fought for. And a free press was going to be a crucial weapon in that fight. The act, in trying to, suppress the press, had actually exposed its importance as a tool for mobilization, for education, for challenging colonial authority.
It's like the British inadvertently gave the nationalist movement this blueprint for using the power of information to their advantage.
Yeah. Exactly. And the nationalist leaders, having witnessed the power of the vernacular press and the impact of its suppression, they understood that controlling the narrative was essential to achieving their goals. They realized that a free and vibrant press could be used to, spread awareness about the injustices of colonial rule, to mobilize public opinion in favor of self-rule, to counter the propaganda that was being disseminated by the British, and to really inspire a sense of national unity and purpose.
So it sounds like they learned this valuable lesson about the strategic importance of communication and the need to control the narrative.
Precisely. And this realization had a profound impact on the subsequent strategies employed by the nationalist movement. They began to focus on building their own media networks, establishing newspapers and journals in various languages across the country, training and supporting journalists who could effectively articulate the nationalist cause, and really engaging with the international community, to garner support for their struggle.
So the legacy of the Vernacular Press Act went far beyond just the fight for a free press. It shaped the very strategies and tactics of the Indian freedom struggle, leading to a more organized, informed, and ultimately successful movement for independence.
That's a very astute observation. The act, in trying to silence dissent, it inadvertently fueled the very fire that it aimed to extinguish.
Yeah.
It exposed the vulnerabilities of colonial rule and provided the nationalist movement with these valuable lessons about the power of information communication, strategic organization.
It's a fascinating example of how even oppressive measures can have these unintended consequences, sparking resistance and ultimately contributing to the very outcome they were designed to prevent.
It's a reminder that attempts to control information, suppress dissent, often backfire,
Yeah.
empowering those who seek change and accelerate the momentum for progress. The story of the Vernacular Press Act is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the power of ideas, and the ultimate triumph of freedom over oppression.
It's a story that continues to resonate today, reminding us of the importance of safeguarding freedom of expression,
Yeah.
holding power accountable, and never giving up the fight for a more just and equitable world.
And it's a story that highlights the critical role of journalists, writers, all those who dare to speak truth to power. Their voices, even when they're when they're silenced, when they're suppressed, they can ignite these movements. They can inspire change and ultimately pave the way for a better future.
And with that, we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. We've explored the events leading to its repeal, the impact it had on the Indian freedom struggle, and the enduring lessons it offers about the importance of a free press and the power of resistance. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last 2 parts really digging into the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. This law designed to silence dissent in colonial India. It actually ended up having some pretty significant and unintended consequences.
Yeah. It's a fascinating case study how attempts to control information can really backfire.
For sure. The British probably hoped to, just extinguish any nationalist sentiments by controlling the press, but they kind of ended up fanning those flames.
Right. You could even say that this act, in its own way, contributed to the eventual, downfall of British rule.
That's a pretty big thought. But before we go too far with that, let's take a step back and think about what we've learned. We've seen how this act restricted the press, it sparked that resistance, and even shaped the strategies of the freedom struggle. But what are the bigger takeaways? What are the lessons we can learn from this?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is how it highlights the power of information, the human desire to share ideas. The British, trying to control the narrative, they actually revealed their own anxieties, their vulnerabilities.
Almost like they were afraid of words, afraid of those words igniting change.
Exactly. And this lesson, it's just as relevant today, as it was back then. Think about the world today. Information everywhere. Everyone's got a platform.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? We've got access to all this information. We can connect with people all over the world, but there's also, misinformation, manipulation.
That's the key point. The Vernacular Press Act might seem like something from the past, but those underlying themes, they're still with us today. The battle over information, the fight for freedom of expression, it's a tension that's always there.
So how do we navigate this landscape? What can we take away from the Vernacular Press Act to help us, make sense of all these challenges in the 21st century?
Well, one thing's for sure, we need to be critical thinkers, media literacy. It's more important than ever with all this information coming at us to be discerning, to be careful about what we consume.
Right. It's not enough to just, accept everything we see or hear. Gotta question sources, consider bias, look for evidence.
Exactly. We need to develop those skills to evaluate information, to recognize propaganda, to form our own, informed opinions.
So it's about being active in the information ecosystem, not just passive, subject to manipulation.
You got it. And it goes beyond just individual responsibility. It's collective action too, supporting organizations that promote media literacy, advocating for policies that protect free expression, holding those in power accountable.
It reminds us that freedom of expression isn't just some, abstract idea. It's crucial for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely. And the Vernacular Press Act, as repressive as it was, it also gives us this sense of hope. It reminds us that even when there are powerful forces trying to control information, that human desire for truth, for freedom, it can win out in the end.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see how the Indian people, even with all those restrictions, they found ways to get around the censorship, to challenge that British narrative.
Those stories of courage, those stories of resilience, they're powerful. A real testament to the human spirit, you know?
It's like even those small acts of resistance, they can have this ripple effect, inspire others.
And that brings us to a question we should all be thinking about. Could something like the Vernacular Press Act happen again today? You know, maybe in a different form. The ways people censor information and control it might be different now,